actually any studies that show that there's a correlation between playing violent video games and then actually committing acts of violence. Hi, I'm Alexis. Today we're talking about, should Christians play video games? Let's get into it. So not all video games are created equal. So for this video, we're going to assume that the content is all wholesome, butterflies and rainbows, nothing questionable about the content. Despite the fact that one of the biggest objections with video games is violence and treatment of women. But we're just gonna skip past that, and we're gonna say, for the sake of this video, you're playing wholesome video games, and should you be spending your time doing that? But real quick, as to the issue of violence, a lot of people seem to have this conception that if you play violent video games, then you're more likely to, perform a school shooting or have some sort of violent tendencies yourself. In this book called Super Better, The Power of Living Gamefully, which is a super great book, I would definitely recommend reading it. They talk about that there aren't actually any studies that show that there's a correlation between playing violent video games and then actually committing acts of violence. But there is a correlation between our mental health issues, and that's predominantly caused by loneliness or things like that. So there is a correlation. If you're playing violent video games by yourself, then you have a bigger tendency, to go to something violent, probably because there are mental health issues in play already. But if you're playing a game like, Call of Duty or something that has where you are playing with lots of friends, then they haven't seen any tendencies. So there is a difference between playing solo and playing with friends. So speaking of which, video games are a powerful way to learn, and it's something that needs to be taken up in education a little bit more. At this point, they play games in education, but I wouldn't say they're high quality by any means. But the whole fact of having levels and, getting badges or things like that, and chunking things into manageable pieces where things get more difficult and then a little easier, more difficult, a little easier, and then, this kind of upward trend. It's a really powerful way to learn. So that's something definitely on the pro side of video games, is that it can really be used to help you learn valuable tools like strategy, for example. Now, I would say my personal biggest objection to video games is the opportunity cost. And opportunity cost means you're not just paying, for the act itself, but you're also paying for what you're not doing. So simply by saying yes to, playing a couple hours of video games, you're automatically saying no for that couple of hours of working on a side hustle or hanging out with your family or hanging out with your friends or having deep, meaningful conversations. Even if you are playing the video game with your friends, you're not necessarily having this deep connection where, you're talking about really what's going on in each other's lives and having a vulnerable, deep connection. So that's one thing to think about, that you're trading what's best for what's fine, in the similar way that TV is, or really any hobby could be. One pro I would say of playing video games is that if you're building like a YouTube channel or Twitch, I would say that is definitely a good use of it, because you're building a community and you're helping other people, and it's not just this solo act. And at the same time, it's pursuing, like career goals or a way to make money. If you're pursuing like video gaming as a career, I would say that's definitely kind of an outlier, where it feels like the pros are a little bit more substantial if you're doing it for a living, or if you're doing it to bring community together and help people. That definitely feels like an outlier. You should ask yourself, am I medicating loneliness? And people do this with all sorts of ways. It's not just video games. This is not a video game specific point right here. I would never want to play video games at the cost of relationships and at the reward of loneliness. Okay, so I just want to wrap it up with my final thoughts. Essentially, what I think about video games is that they're not a sin of commission, like it's not a sin you commit, but it can lead to a sin of omission, meaning you didn't do the things that you should have. It's kind of this apathy sin. It's by doing nothing, you're sinning. If people around you are starting to get the message like, hey, I feel a little bit less important when you play video games, I strongly encourage you to listen to that messaging, because their feelings matter. Basically, they're not inherently bad, they're just not as inherently good as other things. I don't think it's bad to spend your time on it, but if it's causing you to not spend time on great, fantastic things, if you're trading, the best for what's fine, then I think it becomes a problem, and you got to think about your long-term goals. And everything I've said here about video games, I think is really true about TV, about YouTubing, Netflix, being on your phone, basically anything that's drawing you away from community. So, this isn't video game specific. Really, it's just a matter of, are you spending your time on what God would spend his time on? Are you doing things of long-term significance? And if you're, playing video games for 6 hours a day by yourself, I don't think there's long-term significance in that. I challenge you to give them up for 2 weeks and just see what happens. And I don't mean fill up that time with more of the things I mentioned, like, TV, Netflix, being on your phone. I don't mean fill it up with more technology time. I mean fill it up with more relationship building, like with God, with people, your parents, your spouse, your friend. And so I challenge you to fill that time up with things that are creative, creating relationships or creating art or, something like that. So I challenge you to take that time that you've been, consuming and turn that into a time of creation for the next 2 weeks, and just see what happens. And lastly, I challenge you to be set apart. Don't ask the question, is it bad? Like, tiptoeing to the things that maybe are bad, but say, how can I be exceptional? And run after the things that make you exceptional. Don't think about how can I be not bad. Think about how can I be exceptional? And what would an exceptional person do? You know, think of someone who you admire and who you want to be like, and think of what would they do, and then run toward that goal. Thanks, guys.